And AJ is still in the picture there, sort of. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. In this form is not the way I usually like to see you, but clearly we're going to be able to introduce you to a lot of people that maybe only see you introduce a film and don't get a chance to talk to you about what it is that you do, what it is that brings the films to audiences for so many years. Clearly it's not the way that it was. It's virtual right now, as opposed to being in person, but there's some exciting programming that you're still able to do. I'd like to start out with hearing from each of you a little bit about how you got here, your background, your loves in film, the films that really influenced you, that brought you to the Pacific Film Archive. And I think we'll start with Susan.
Yeah, hi Gary, thanks. It's fun to be doing this with you. How I started in film, I sort of think about falling in love with film by about the age of 10. My parents were academics, they were cinephiles. I was very fortunate to be in a family where we did a lot of world travel. So I have early memories of seeing films abroad. If it was the summer we spent in Beirut in 1973, or a year abroad where we lived in India and seeing films in Mumbai. But the thing is that it was also, I was growing up as a kind of preteen and teenager in Toronto in the 1970s. So very soon I was seeking out films and art houses that were throughout the city, and also early memories of the Toronto International Film Festival. But I feel as if I came at a love of cinema mostly through a love of international cinema. My mother ran an international film group when my brother was in junior high, and I tagged along, but they had the concept of going to see a Kurosawa film and then going to eat Japanese food afterwards, and for the junior high students to be thinking about film. She passed away when I was a teenager, but I very much remember being influenced by an English course that was the history of cinema, but it was also film studies and production. So by my late teens, I was making Super 8 films, and then in university studying film studies and a second degree in production. I really always had this kind of twinned approach of an interest in the history of cinema and also in making films. So my early influences in terms of filmmaking were Ingmar Bergman, and I tried desperately to make some films that were influenced by my dreams and that were narrative in structure, and that didn't go so well. But I also, in my early 20s, was falling in love with the avant-garde tradition. So when I took the camera into my own hands, I was very much in the spirit of Bruce Bailey, Warren Sombart, Jonas Mekas, a kind of a lyrical tradition, a diaristic tradition. But also this was a moment when I got involved with the Student Film Society and learned about putting together film programs and working with others in that venture at the University of Toronto. And then moving forward through time, I did work at Cinematheque Ontario, which was a young cinematheque. I worked there from 1993 to 2005, when we were just building up this year-round programming institution as part of the Toronto International Film Festival. And we were very much modeling ourselves on Cinematheque Québécoise in Montreal, but also the Pacific Film Archive. And in terms of what we wanted our screen to be. We weren't so much thinking in the dimension of being a film archive, but we were very excited by the type of very dynamic year-round programs that we could offer. And that went on, for me, that went on for 12 years, but I was brought to Berkeley. My father passed away in 2003, and I was going through a sense of questioning, what would I like to do with my life? And I had been, over the years, working very closely as a kind of colleagues with Kathy Geritz, with Edith Kramer, with the staff of the Pacific Film Archive. And I'd met Edith in 1999 at a FIOF Congress, and then came out to Berkeley. Some years later, when a position opened here, I applied and joined the staff at BAMPFA. So I think part of a through line is this interest I have in terms of being involved with year-round programming. I've always been a generalist, so I love always learning new things from cinema, from putting together programs. And that's the short, well, that's the condensed version of how I got here.
Okay. Kate, you're also from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
You're also from Canada. and have probably some crossover. I don't know if you two knew each other in Canada much or worked together. But tell us about you.
Yeah, for me, I came to cinema quite late. I grew up in a rural area and we didn't really have access to cinema and cultural institutions. It was always a drive, and it was always a fight nagging my parents to drive me somewhere to approach culture. So I was a bookworm, I read a lot, and I was really interested in fine art and painting and art history, and learned mostly through the books I was reading. And when I discovered the avant-garde movements of the 1920s in my high school library and discovered that, you know, artists had made films, I was like, oh, maybe cinema is a relevant art form. And I got really interested in the idea of the using a film as a material to make fine art. And so when I got to university, they had 16 millimeter prints in the film in the library that I could watch and project for myself. And it was just, it kind of opened up a whole new world. And then I got involved with the Student Film Society programming and watching films and really learning a lot about films all at once, because I hadn't really thought they were interesting in terms of fine art, but I really got interested in the avant-garde traditions and the formal approaches to film, and discovered a lot of the avant-garde filmmakers, and was an awful snob. Like anything with an actor in it was like, you know, seemed completely irrelevant to me. You know, I was really interested in formal cinema. But then I also got very involved in the technical side, because the college that I was at, they also projected cinema, and they were looking for projectionists. And so I applied to be like an AV tech and projectionist at the college to help make money and pay my way through university, and also gave me a whole new perspective on films, because I was showing a lot of films for different film classes that I may or may not have been enrolled in. And I just, the cinematic world kind of opened up, and I got really interested in the technical side and started projecting for different film societies. I got trained as a 35 millimeter projectionist. And it was at a time where there was an explosion of independent cinemas in Toronto. And I started getting all sorts of different projection gigs for all kinds of different festivals. And every new film I saw, I was like, oh, you know, documentaries can be really great. And wow, dramatic features can be super interesting. But I was always really interested in the way people experimented with form to tell stories. But it was really marvelous. I started traveling to different festivals to see films, and sometimes to project for different festivals and events. And then I also spent almost 20 years in the projection booth for the Cinematheque Ontario in Toronto. So that was really a hands-on way of learning about cinema. We were screening usually two different 35 millimeter features every single night. And I was inspecting, preparing, and projecting most of those screenings, as well as very complex mixed short programs. And I got to meet a lot of amazing artists who were always appreciative that I found that a lot of artists had, especially avant-garde filmmakers, had negative experiences with projectionists. So they would come into the booth and they would be very defensive and very worried that, because they were used to projectionists not taking their work seriously, and they would come in and I would already know their work, and I would have some sort of understanding of what they were looking for. So that was really gratifying, to be able to work with these amazing artists and have them be happy with how their films were looking on screen. And all this time I was in the booth, I was doing occasional programs, and then eventually moved over to the Images Festival in Toronto, which is the largest festival in North America and longest running of avant-garde cinema, both on and off screen. So we were showing works in galleries and installation works and the whole range of moving image art. So that was also an amazing experience. So that's sort of a little bit of my background. And then when I saw the job come up here at BAMPFA, actually a lot of different people from different parts of my life sent me the job description and said, you should really think of applying for this. And I was like, wow, that BAMPFA, it's just, that seemed like cinematic mecca. The history of programming at the institution, I was very familiar with the work that Kathy had done over the years and Susan had done over the years. And Kathy, I'd actually worked with Kathy to bring a program of the Bay Area avant-garde radical light to the Images Festival. And it was just kind of like, seemed like it would be a dream to work with Susan and Kathy, and then in the tradition of people like Tom Letty and Edith Kramer. And it's just such a fabulous opportunity. So I feel very lucky to be here.
Great, we're lucky to have you too, as with all of you. So I guess your relationship with the people in the projection booth at PFA is an interesting one, because you know what can and can't be done.
Yeah.
Sometimes they say, oh, those programmers, they expect this and that, and you know it's reality. Well, all of you really do, because you're pretty intimate with your team. So Kathy, I've known you the longest of the three of you. You also have a background in experimental cinema programming, and the book Radical Light, which you then did a film series on that Kate mentioned. But fill us in. Tell us about it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gary. In a certain way, I have a similar experience of Kate, in that I was from a small town and didn't grow up going to movies. We even had a black and white TV. It wasn't until I went to PFA, as we called it when I first started going there, that I even discovered that a film I had watched on TV every year, Wizard of Oz, was half in color, not all black and white. So that was a shocking experience. But I think in many ways I'm a product of what was originally called Pacific Film Archive. When I went to UC Berkeley, and somehow I saw the handwritten marquees that used to be outside the theater. And they happened to be screening a film that a director I had heard of, Hitchcock. So I went to a screening, but it was silent, it was black and white, and it was introduced by this amazing woman who later I learned was Edith Kramer. And so I just decided to go back. And then I realized that the series were organized in this very comprehensive way. This was the days of Tom Letty, where you could see movies on some days at 11 o'clock. So like I would study and then go see The Prisoner at 11 afterwards. So it was suddenly being dropped into something that was a culture, a community, an education. And so friends and I that began to be what we did when we weren't studying. And a series that just completely changed not only me, but my community of friends was a Kurosawa retrospective. We'd never seen films like that. We just were religious to be there, and then of course had to talk about the films. And so it just created this atmosphere of deep immersion. And even the very experimental films of Kurosawa, like Tedesca Din, we were all in there crying, out of these very, kind of complex ways of looking at emotion and the world. But then I took a course I was taking a lot of art and art history and kind of everything else. I I was someone who was able to hide how long I was at school because they didn't have computers. And when I finally graduated, they were like really shocked how many units I had. But I was going to get everything I could out of my education. And one class I took was on the avant-gardes. Any avant-garde, you know, it kind of what sort of overlaps with what Kate said. It was in art history. So of course we're seeing Man Ray and Buñuel and others. But I had never seen, when I was going to the PFA, I hadn't selected going to experimental films. I was very immersed in these big retrospectives. And so suddenly I was seeing artist-made films in this little unit of a class that was much bigger. And they took us to the research, what we used to call, I just suddenly forgot what we used to call it, the small screening room. And in this little room that held barely anyone, we were watching experimental films. And whoever was introducing them, maybe it was Nancy Goldman or Linda Artell, let us know that that was a specialty of the collection. So as soon as I graduated, I started volunteering there to get access to the collection, because they said that, you know, volunteers got to use. So I got, you know, trained on how to project 16, and I just started going through the avant-garde collection. It just was amazing to me. And it was interesting because in some ways it just suited my way of looking and my sensibility to find these films that were completely unknown to me. And then of course later, you know, when I was meeting filmmakers, that's what often happened to people. They would see an experimental film and it would be like, yes, this is for me, you know. And so even though as a volunteer, the first thing I did was cut up a whole collection of articles and forget to put the citations. So Judy Block, you know, who wrote the film notes, came and told me, well, you know, it's kind of useless for us if we don't know where the sources are. Nonetheless, I got better. And by the time they had a job open up at the very lowest ladder of full-time employees, it was like essentially being the assistant to the general manager, Tom Schmidt, and to Edith Kramer. Who eventually, first there was a period that no one was in the position when I first started assisting where there's an absence. And working with work study students. So essentially, I had an old-fashioned education. I was mentored. And it was a dual mentoring, you know, where I learned about grant writing and kind of thinking organizationally through Tom, and I learned about curating and researching prints and thinking about how to put a program together through Edith. And, you know, there I was not in curatorial at all, but nonetheless, at some point, I was given the opportunity to curate some programs, and I learned that there is nothing so satisfying and so eye-opening as curating shorts programs. Just putting them together in a program, there's nothing quite like it. And as you know, Kate said, you get to meet the artists and you get access to how they think, but you also really get to know films through curating. Of course, it's true of all series, but there's something very special about putting together a shorts program that teaches you about curating, thinking about films on all kinds of levels, rather formal content, intent, but then also, of course, what happens when you put them up against each other. And also you learn to trust your intuition, because when in those days you often couldn't see the program you had put together. You drew on your memory and, you know, just like trying to picture it. And then when I'd be sitting in the theater and it was working, you'd find out that there were connections that you hadn't seen consciously, but unconsciously, there were even more connections between the works, and the program was even more interesting than you knew. You know? And so anyhow, I just continued to grow in that way of getting to look at cinema through going to where I worked. You know, I eventually went and got a master's in working with really wonderful people at San Francisco State. But through viewing, through immersing myself in curated series, what we at PFA did so well. And I was able to eventually kind of move up the ladder from the lowest rung a couple more up and get to do the work I'm doing now, which I'm forever grateful for. What a thing to end up at, you know.
Bravo to all three of you for what you bring to us. And yeah, we're in an interesting time because historically people had to come to Berkeley, come to Berkeley Art Museum to see the films. And right now we're in a time of virtual cinema where they can't do that. But in an interesting way, you're bringing some programming to people all over the country, or maybe the world. I don't know whether there's what they call geo-blocking or not on your programs, but people are now able to see some of what you do from all over the world. And so let's talk a bit about how you approach programming for virtual cinema. Yeah, let's just jump in, anybody.
Well, maybe just by comparison, just to state the difference of what we've all gone through since March, which is in normal times at our theater, which is single screen for the most part, presenting 500 programs a year on a Wednesday to Sunday schedule, with about 25% of those programs showing more than one time in a repeat scheduling, but otherwise this great variety. And also an important function of how we work as a curatorial team is that we were working in a 3-month window of time, a printed program guide. That was our measure of, you know, how we're measuring out our programs, creating balance across a 3-month season when we were in print. And then of course, all of the rhythms that you take into consideration in terms of being able to draw the largest possible audience for a 200-seat cinema. So across the year in the Breber Osher Theater, we were bringing in 60,000 viewers a year. So with the closure and with the COVID period, you know, first off, it took us quite a number of weeks to cancel 120 programs that we had already laid out for our spring season. And it wasn't until late April that we put up our first virtual cinema program. But since the end of April to this time now, we've mounted 50 programs on the virtual platform. And it's only though been since early September where we've had a lot more freedom, because now we have part of our programming is on our own platform where we work with Eventive. But it allows us to be much freer to work directly with artists to mount their films and to have a type of programming that resembles what we used to do in the old theater. So just wanted to lay that out as a period of what this transitional period has meant. For the first 4 months, pretty much everything we've been showing has come from distributors who are working with art houses to make films available. And now, since September, we're moving back into a kind of a hybrid of a much broader spectrum of programming. So that's one point. But then, I mean, maybe we want to, I guess I also, I feel the limitations of working within the digital realm, because if you were, Gary, if you were asking us this question in normal times, the answer would be so deep and wide because of all of the possibilities of what we as curators can bring to the screen through working with archives, distributors, filmmakers. But within the virtual environment, it's a very narrow cast. So
I don't want to limit the conversation to virtual cinema, because I think that our viewers are really interested in what it is that you do in normal times. So we're talking a kind of, you know, hybrid conversation here because of the reality of right now. But you're going to come back to doing those other things, and you're expanding what you do on a virtual cinema level as well.
So I would just, in terms of throwing out some thoughts on this topic, I would say in normal times, so when we're putting together 120 programs across a 3-month period, a lot of the things that we use as measures are how those programs balance each other in a particular season. A lot of ideas come from what might be available through an archival pipeline or through coming out in distribution. So what's available, what tours might be coming to North America and be available for a period of time. And then also, frankly, a lot of good ideas from the public. I've often a lot of series ideas do come from people saying, oh, could you show this film, or could you bring some films from this country, or there might be a topic. So those are some starting thoughts, but maybe share this with Kathy and Kate in terms of where some of our ideas come from, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And then we can circle back to the virtual.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Kathy?
Well, I mean, ideas come from viewing work, from seeing trends that you know, seem to appear, having an idea that comes from the culture that you then want to see, are there films related to it? And then because we do certain regular screenings, I have a series that I do that's every fall that's on alternative vision, which is experimental film, and then every spring on documentary. For those, I'm just always looking for work that might be interesting to, you know, share both with, those are hybrid series, let me step back to say, where UC Berkeley classes are coming to the screenings and the public is. So they're functioning as a way of introducing students to a field they may not have seen, particularly artist-made film. They're more likely to have seen documentary, although that's changed over time. There was a time when you didn't see documentary much in the theater, of course. And so we were also introducing kind of the breadth of documentary, not just being about information, but also being a very creative form of delivering a nonfiction material. So I'm always looking for things to work to see in those categories. And then, as Susan said, sometimes, you know, you see like even a archival work and you think, what else has this person made? You know, when you want to kind of uncover some aspect of film history that's not known, you know, that, so there's the aspect that we are reintroducing people to works they may have seen in the context of putting the broader selection of that maker's work, or introducing them to artists who they have never heard of. And of course, there's very different ways of working, that the name is already familiar, the name is not familiar. You know, I'm particularly interested in, you know, bringing forth works from the global South, that are shown less often in theaters, from Latin America, from Africa. I work with someone on the wonderful New York African Film Festival on a series of African film every year. And so there you're working with the need also to, how do you introduce people to and excite people about work? And that's why one reason that we've always had writing be a huge part of what we do. Right now, we don't have the full program guide we have, but we try also to provide, through writing, an introduction into how to see a work, and also the way we always program a series, it's also a way to give people an introduction, like, you might want to see this work. So I think that's just a really interesting part of our work, is that it's got this educational component that requires our imagination of how do we interest people in work they don't already know.
And you never know what's going to inspire people and what's going to bring people to the cinema. So I mean, both Kathy and Susan and I all have different things that made us interested in cinema. And if you talk to anyone who walks through the door of BAMPFA or clicks through to BAMPFA, they all come to cinema for different reasons. Maybe they're looking for information in a documentary. Maybe they have a favorite actor or actress. And so it's really fun to think of different ways to bring people in. You do a thematic series, say, about, you know, the Vietnam War or hippie modernism, or you can do an actor or actress series if films are available. Like I did a series of the films of Anna, starring Anna Magnani, And a lot of those were familiar, but some of them weren't. So because you're seeing like the lesser known works in an artist's career, and that's another way of introducing you to new directors, because you're like, oh, this actor worked with this director who I didn't know. And then I was like, oh, that director's works are very interesting. So it's all these connections. It's just this growing consciousness about cinema. And there are all kinds of different intersecting pathways to get there. So that's really exciting. And then also a lot of what we do is envision the people that we would want to bring to BAMPFA, because we're constantly writing grants to be able to afford to bring people to the theater and people that we would like to interact with. So thinking about who are the filmmakers now who might have a body of work who might be lesser known to our local audience, but are really making their mark on international cinema. So a couple of years ago, we had Mia Hansen-Løve, and a lot of our audiences hadn't seen her films before, but the audience really fell in love with her over the course of the series. We were able to bring her to be in Berkeley for an extended period. So she was introducing her own films and being able to engage with Q&As with our audience, as well as she selected films that had influenced her. And she grew up as a cinephile. And so she was able to introduce our audience to her work through the work that she loved, and also introduce new work to us that some of us hadn't seen because it was work that she had access to. So this is just another thing that we do. And one of my first guests that I was able to bring was as part of a grant-funded series when I first arrived at BAMPFA was Madeline Anderson, who's an African-American documentary film director. And I had read about her work through this film series that had happened in New York, and I, wrote to the distributor, and they were like, you should definitely bring her. It will be the highlight of your life. Here's a picture of her. This is the distributor. She was like, I'll send you a picture of this filmmaker. I keep it on my desktop for inspiration. Anytime I'm feeling a little low, I just look at Madeline Anderson. So I was like, okay, this is exciting. You need to bring this person. And it was remarkable. She came with her daughter. I think she was 89 at the time. And it was in 2016, and so she came with her daughter, and we had her for 2 evenings talking, one program of her own films, and then one program of Shirley Clark's The Cool World, which she had worked with Shirley Clark to make. And we had her in conversation with Orlando Bagwell, and it was really amazing to have this, amazing civil rights pioneering African-American filmmaker talk about her experience and breaking down the barriers that she faced. And so when we first went into the sort of the COVID period, we were thinking about things that could be relevant and that we might have done that we wanted to bring back for a broader virtual audience. And so we decided that we could access Madeline Anderson's 3 films which had all been restored, and put them online for our audience, along with the conversation that she had done with Orlando Bagwell. So that's sort of a way of connecting what we love to do and what we do in normal times with what we're doing now. So thinking of highlights of our programming past, and then programs that maybe not as many people that as we had wanted would see. So we have a limited space in our theater, but by putting the Madeline Anderson films online for free for an extended period of time, we're able to reach a far greater audience and really I think these films should be known by everyone. And so it's an opportunity to say, here they are, take a look. You can watch them as many times as you want. You can watch this interview with Madeline Anderson, and then there's a lot of other interviews with her available online. So it's a way of introducing work to a broader audience through what we had already done.
And those 3 films are currently available. Anybody can go watch them on your site. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And is the conversation coming up? You're doing that just one time?
The conversation was recorded when she was here.
Right.
So it's pre-recorded and available.
Okay, great. That's
Yeah.
great.
You know, another through line, I think it's interesting that at BAMPFA for film, that our curatorial work also includes all of the work that we do around education. Education is not a separate department for film. So this is a really important point. I mean, all of the way in which we strategically align our programming with activity on campus, that's a big part of how we're centering our work, as is the way that we appeal to different age groups. You know, we have a movie matinees for all ages, for the young kids and families, films that play well to broad audiences, but then we've also done a lot with continuing education in terms of lecture screening series and trying to offer more depth around our programming for lifelong learners. And since we've moved to the new location, there's been a Berkeley High initiative that really has been this column of 200 students walking from Berkeley High to BAMPFA for programs that are specific for them during the day. And so, I mean, that's, when we look at our programming, I think we're also always trying to think about reaching different types of audiences, different age groups, and, you know, and in that way, again, kind of really trying to round out what we offer.
That's really important because the general public has no idea that's going on. And those are screenings that are not on the calendar.
That's right.
You might happen to be at the museum and see, oh, what are those 200 kids going? But I think it's very important for people to know what is being done beyond what's in the published program. That this is not just an auditorium that sits empty many hours of the day, but it's being used for a lot of different things.
Exactly. Yeah. And also instilling a love for cinema at a young age. It's just so important. Of course, the students at Berkeley who are studying film studies or other fields that use film, that's great. But I think it's so good to catch viewers at a young age and get them into the pattern of seeing films in a cinema and with a large audience.
Oh, absolutely. Because that's how we all luckily fell into it. Yeah. I know it's easy to fall in love with Mia and her films, and one of the things that I remember through all my years, I've been going to MPFA, P4PFA, since the opening night, was when a visiting filmmaker comes and discovers the resources that you have there, the library, the film collection, and meeting other filmmakers by pure accident. So it's fascinating to me what they discover there. And just as Kate, you were talking about, a sort of cross-fertilization, that you're showing the films of an actress, Savannah Magnani, and then you discover a director. The same thing I think happens when a filmmaker comes to Berkeley to present their films, and then maybe they go watch a film that they'd never heard of that's playing on another night, and it opens it up. So your influence is way beyond the audience in the Bay Area, even pre-virtual cinema.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yeah, that's great.
It is interesting that the way that our reach now under virtual cinema is different. You were asking at the beginning, are we reaching other countries? I mean, of course, some works are geo-blocked, but others aren't, and many of the programs that we're doing aren't. And so once, you know, virtual cinema is, of course, in some ways, software-made cinema, a software-made cinema, unlike the cinema behind you. And so with that, you get a lot of data. And so we're able to see that people are watching from all over. Of course, you know, we miss the actual people. You don't actually see people who are in the cinema. And of course, they're watching at all different times. There's something, you know, not unifying about it. But we have that addition that we're reaching beyond our community here. It's so, you know, I think all of us had to think differently when we began doing virtual cinema. Like, what is this nearly cinema or almost cinema, and what can we do? And so I was mentioning that I do an annual series with a class, the Alternative Visions. And so at the start, while Kate and Susan were first envisioning how do we even stream films, I was off like working with Jeffrey Scholar, who teaches at UC Berkeley, Like, how are we going to introduce students, and of course the general public, to artist-made film on their little computer? Well, for me, I only have a laptop, I don't have a TV. So, you know, all of the things that that entails, that rather than the film dominating them, they dominate the film. So how are we going to do this? You know, and we're going to be showing artists' work not in the way they intended, where it's all computer based. You know, it's a digital copy of often what was a 16mm film or Super 8 or whatever. The artists are going to be, you know, computer available. I mean, of course, there's something nice. You get the best seat in the house to talk with them. You know, you're up close and hear everything. But so we came to a couple of decisions, and one was that there are works that were made for the computer, you know, so some video, right? That's part of our history, video work. So we're doing one program that draws on this amazing project of our library and a collection, which you were mentioning earlier, which is a guerrilla TV group called Top Value Television, or better known as TV. And they covered the conventions. So what better than to do a program that, of course, is fine on TV, right? So that was one thought we had, works that were designed to be, or could also function on the small screen. But then also we thought, we're not giving the avant-garde artists the way they would show their work and have it intended. But what we could do is ask people who have done a lot of thinking about the work to present the work. So what you're also coming for is someone's thoughts. So we began looking at, for recent books. So we had a screening already that was handmade cinema, that was Gregory Zinman had a new book. So by him speaking about what it is to think about handmade cinema and showing a selection, it was both kind of a lecture and a viewing. We did the same thing. Right now we have a lecture by a Colombian animator, Simón Wilches Castro, where he talks about Latin American animation through the lens of, you know, an aesthetic that he feels developed out of some of the trauma of the history. So again, you're getting both the thinking of someone and the work. We have another series called Exit West, Immigration on Film, that is what we would call a thematic series, right? You know, it's something we would traditionally do, but it's in conjunction with incoming students at Berkeley who were invited to read the same book, which is Exit West by Mohsin Hamid, a Pakistani writer, of course, about immigration. And so the On the Same Page program, where the students read this book, asked us to put together some screenings. And so we selected 3 programs of work, and in particular selected films about immigration that were hybrid, that were made with the participants. So a kind of a way of giving access to a community way of working through the films. You know, while we're all very isolated, to see the products of community-made films. So in one case, you know, an immigrant was given a camera. In other cases, the immigrants, several other cases, the immigrants work and participate in telling their stories. And again, you know, we really emphasized having conversations and access to thinking, you know, the filmmakers who are thinking about these and people who are teaching those classes. I think that those conversations are something that has been really valuable. Kate could address that because she's worked a lot on them. She did this amazing conversation with Brett Story, a filmmaker and a writer. I think her name is Mihan Christ, where the two of them just listening, it was so valuable to hear this conversation. Two amazing people talking about film, ideas of our times, in ways that it was just something that I was very glad to have access to. So there's certain things that we're doing online that aren't as, in some ways that was more valuable to me online than in the theater, because I was so starved for just how people think and how do they react to troubled times. And here these two amazing women gave me a little bit of hope and energy.
Several things come to my mind as you were just talking, but the first one would be, are those conversations available on an ongoing basis? I know there are a lot of interesting resources on the website, but once that's happened, is it still possible for people to go back and look at it? You've now got us all wanting to hear that conversation.
They are still available. The exception is the ones that are part of the alternative vision and ism. There's a 2-week lag. They're on a slightly different model. The lecture and the conversation is part of what you purchase. And so we wait to post them, whereas Kay can address this, but the conversations she's doing, I think, are separate. Kay, do you want to address that?
Yeah, definitely. The conversations that we were doing over the course of the summer with filmmakers whose films were, maybe we were working with distributors to post their films, and then had conversations with them, and they're all available on our YouTube page. They're easily accessible and can be viewed over and over again. Just thinking about Brett Story's film, The Hottest August, and thinking about how this moment is different from our usual year-round programming. It's a moment where we were not only just trying to respond to going online, but really trying to think about offering a selection of films that were responsive to the time and to the urgent issues that of our times, of like our very specific times. And so Brett Story's film, The Hottest August, is about global warming, and she made it in 2017, but it has lost none of its relevance. And I think when I was looking for films that we would want to share with our audience and then put them in context with conversations, I was looking for films that seemed that they were responding to our particular moment. So we had the John Lewis documentary that a lot of places were showing, but we had a wonderful conversation with Don Porter and a local journalist about that. We are presenting 1,000 Cuts, which is a documentary about the censorship of the press in the Philippines, which really speaks to the need of journalism to maintain some sort of democracy. And we had a wonderful conversation with the filmmaker about that, and a professor from the Berkeley School of Journalism. And the Madeline Anderson films, to me, are something that really gives me hope, because I'm like, she was making films about the civil rights movement in the 1960s, and women striking, nurses, African-American nurses striking in the South in the 60s. And it's easy to look around us and feel a little hopeless, but when you look at what different people have overcome over history, it's like I think maybe these films are a tool to thinking about how we can organize and how we can make a difference to the world. So it's sort of putting our times in context and then also responding to the moment.
Well, you mentioned that some of the films are being shown by other virtual cinemas. So independent movie theaters all over the country are able to share in the revenues on these films. And many of them are showing a lot of places. Some places I don't think are curating as well as they should be. It's certainly not the way that you were curating. And then you have these special conversations which are unique to you. But I think you're showing a film first run, if you will, Air Me, that is exclusive. Presented by you. It's a
we are,
but an incredible movie.
Yeah, just with as I said earlier, since September, we've had more ability to host certain types of films, but made and work directly with filmmakers. And in this way, we almost become a quasi-distributor for films. So in the case of Ermi, directed by Veronica Silva and Susan Fanschel, just released this, I mean, it came out this summer at the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. And then we approached them and asked if we could be the platform to host Ermi, and that there's no geo-blocking on that film. Of course, I'm sure their film will get into film festivals, but we are hosting that film on our site for the months to come and really trying to get the word out widely. So we're using our outreach efforts to try and circle of context to go as broad as possible. And this is new for us to be working this dimension, but it's a wonderful film. A film about Veronica Silver's mother, who had a long life. She lived to the age of 97. She was a survivor of the Holocaust. A fascinating documentary done in such a beautifully balanced way. And it's by two filmmakers who are, wonderful editors and filmmakers in their own right. And then, so that's Ermi's up. And we did a live stream last weekend, and that you can go to the BAMPFA YouTube channel to find the live stream conversation with their music composer, Todd Bokelheide, and the two filmmakers, or we embed that conversation on the webpage for the film. And another similar example is a film by Linda Hogeland, Edo Avant-Garde, which is a very visual documentary about Japanese scroll painting. And shot by a top-notch Japanese cinematographer, and it's quite an exquisite view into art museums and collections of Asian art around the world, and then having this chance to really look at the tradition of painting from the late 1600s to the mid 1800s. And it's a very special piece, and it kind of felt like a perfect film for BAMPFA to get behind.
And that's one current exhibit that relates to it. BAMPFA is known for, particularly the stuff that Julia White curates, incredible Asian art, and you often do work with the gallery curators to do programming, and I'm interested in that a little bit, if you will, about how you approach doing some programming with a gallery show.
The gallery, our art curators work on a much longer lead time. They're usually working 2 to 3 years out. So for Kate and Kathy and I, when we sit in on curatorial meetings that are planning into the future, we're always asked, oh, can you relate film programming to this? And of course, you can almost relate film programming to any topic, given how interdisciplinary film can be. But I think we could talk about some of the projects where we've really made the decision, this is a perfect time to do film and art curatorial, that's where our film programming is speaking to gallery exhibits. I mean, you guys have done some beautiful projects in recent years, if you want to offer some of those.
Or anything you might be thinking about for the future.
Oh, for the future.
Okay.
Oh, well, for the future, I've been a little bit cursed because the very day that we closed was the moment when we were installing Ulrike Ottinger's photographs as a matrix exhibition back on March 16th. And of course, we had already in early March, we had just launched a retrospective of Ulrike Ottinger's films, and she was to be our guest during the San Francisco International Film Festival. And that would have been a project that would have normally been running from March through the end of June, a chance to see her photographic work as Ottinger is an excellent example of an artist who has traveled the world with her still camera, but also filmed all of her own films as a cinematographer. So that's something that, I still hope that we could find some way of, well, certainly showing the photographs maybe next spring, if the BAMPFA galleries can open next spring, and then find some way of working with Ulrike Ottinger to show her films virtually. But she has a real preference for showing her films in the cinema.
Yeah. Yeah. Luckily, you did have her here. Was it last year?
We did, and that was sort of where we launched this next project, the idea for it. So yeah, and she has a new film, Paris Calligrams, which we'd love to show. So I'm sure that will come up in the future, and who knows, maybe the Matrix exhibit and the film series will happen at the same time.
Ulrika is an example, again, of what we were talking about before. So when she was here before, some people came to see her film about Shanghai because they were interested in China. And then they said, who is this filmmaker? Mm-hmm. And they came and saw a lot of other films. And there was that kind of cross-fertilization, which is just the beauty of what it is that you do. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, having done the Weibei exhibit back when, you know, we were first opening the museum, it allowed some of the thinking that happened when we did that series, that exhibit. It was Larry Render, David Wilson, and I, and it focused on, you know, works from the Bay Area. But some of the thinking about including experimental film in the galleries helped me at this moment of switching to, you know, digital presentation. So it's hard to go back and recall that it was a lot of angst about, do we show a digital copy of an artist's film, you know, on a screen or on a monitor in the gallery? It's like, I felt, you know, although other people were doing it, I felt it was still somewhat daring for us because we were so very oriented to showing works in their original format. Of course, that was becoming a complicated issue because things would be restored digitally as opposed to restored on film. So, you know, the mixture of how one thought about it was already very complicated, a mixture of ways. But, you know, one thing that talking with others, the curators and other artists and all, came to was that there's something important about being able to see a work repeatedly. And especially if you think about the world of experimental film or independent film, it's very difficult to see a lot of work more than once, you know, or you know, we knew that, you know, I'm of the generation that, you know, if you missed a screening, it didn't exist on video or DVD. So there was a period where that was how you viewed. But it's still true of a lot of artists made in independent film. It is not out on, it is not streaming. It is not out on DVDs and VHS. And so the fact of showing work so that people can see it multiple times and really get it under their skin and into their, you know, both emotional and intellectual, you know, processes is worthwhile. And that was a way we thought about being able to move forward to do that show. But it also relates, I think Kate mentioned it as well, that people can watch a work more than once, you know, and when they want. And that there is something different about that. And then on top of it, many artists have begun, filmmakers have begun to be interested in having their work be shown digitally in installation form. So it was very interesting to me to work with Apsara DiCinzio, the Matrix curator, with Pat O'Neill, a Los Angeles experimental filmmaker. He said he preferred his work to be showed in an installation because he wanted people to be able to watch it the amount of time they wanted, come back and pick where to watch it again. And so there's been a number of really interesting collaborations that are installation-based, working with filmmakers. And Kate has done many of them, and maybe you might want to mention, speak about that.
Well, I worked with Apsara DiCinzio to present Arthur Jafa's The White Album, which was a commission for BAMPFA that later went on to win the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale. So that was an opportunity to work with an artist whose work has shown in cinemas. He started as a cinematographer, and to sort of present his film in the galleries and then have a couple of evenings with him in the Barbara Osher Theater showing films that he'd made, and then a program of films films and videos that he selected. So it's collaborating with Apsara on the Matrix exhibitions is really a way of looking at interesting contemporary moving image artists and how they work sort of on screen or in photography or in installation works. And so it's just showing how the works for the cinema also relate to the works in the gallery. It's been a great opportunity. And then other times, I mean, other times I'm working more with looser connections to the exhibitions in the galleries. So when we had our amazing Hans Hofmann show, I guess that was last year, 2 years ago. I was so looking forward to that because, I mean, coming to the Bay Area and seeing those paintings, like we had a small exhibition, and I had never really looked at Hans Hofmann's works. I had seen, you see them in galleries and museums, but I'd never really, they didn't have an impact on me until I came to BAMPFA, saw them in the galleries, and I was just so overwhelmed by the beauty of all that paint and just the viscous celebration of color is just so fabulous. And so heading up to the show, I was like, oh, I would really just love to do a series about painters painting. Just not anything relating to the Hofmann directly, but kind of participating in that celebration of artists at work and what painters painting can mean. And there are some of my favorite films are about painters painting. So I was, sort of pitched that to Susan and Kathy. And so that was a real opportunity to, and then when I was introducing the films, I would also say, go and take a look at the Hans Hofmann films. This is just a way of thinking more broadly about painting and the history of painting and painters and what that means. So that was sort of a more impressionistic response to what was going on at the gallery, but I hope it was still valuable to be able to watch these films and then walk through the gallery of these amazing paintings. And then with other exhibitions, when Larry and Greg Castillo were doing the hippie modernism exhibition at BAMPFA, I was like, oh, there were so many great films that could relate to this. Like, just, I mean, we could do hippie modernism 24/7. There were so many great films that could relate to this exhibition, and kind of give it a little bit more scope. You can focus on some of the Bay Area relevance to the show. And so that was a real opportunity to do a really fun thematic with some very familiar iconic films, but then also show some lesser known films, and a film that I discovered in the archive, a copy of the film, a film of Bobby Seale, an interview with him in jail, in San Francisco County Jail, just a broad-ranging conversation, which was just a remarkable film that I was able to integrate into this series, and it's not well known. So it was an opportunity to show things like Zabriskie Point and things that people would know that definitely related to the series and that zeitgeist that they were talking about, but also looking at the historical films from Canyon Cinema, which was also a part of that zeitgeist, and then finding things in our collection that were real treasures. So that's sort of some of the ways that I've thought about doing film exhibition that relate to the exhibitions in the galleries.
And I just want to mention there's one upcoming, hopefully, depending on, the times of COVID, which is to do a series with Apsara Dickensio's New Time exhibition, which is an exhibition around feminist art, contemporary feminist art. And of course, there are so many women filmmakers we would love to bring and focus on their work. So we're hoping all the stars align so that can happen. So it's one of those cases of a perfect fit.
So I don't want to take people away from watching films on your site, but Turner Classic Movies is currently doing Mark Cousins' incredible 14 chapter documentary about women filmmakers, and they have programmed films that I've never heard of before, filmmakers I'm being introduced to. So that's kind of a good prep for something that you might be doing in the future. Just sort of wanted to mention that.
Great.
So there was a discussion about being able to see films over and over again in this virtual format. And can you tell us, what is the window? If somebody goes to rent a film, how can they watch it more than once and over what period of time?
It's case by case. We've got various platforms going up and working with various sources or mounting films ourselves. So the actual fact is everything we have up may have slightly different terms from the next. But generally speaking, it would be a rental that would give you a minimum of a 48-hour window, or possibly up to 5 days, for if you rent and then have access to the film. So that would allow for multiple viewings by somebody. Yeah, and I think that probably through the virtual period, chances are we will have a variety of different sources for how the films are being mounted. So I think that it will vary. And then sometimes some of our programs dictate that the whole experience of that program is in a short time frame, maybe a 3-day window, and then that program comes down. Many other programs are up and will be up for 6 to 8 weeks or longer. So,
for example, currently there's the Latin American animation program. And those films are deserving of being looked at more than once. So I'll be able to come back within that period of time and watch them.
So that was just last night extended through Sunday. So they're up, for people who hear this immediately, they're up through Sunday. There's also a really interesting related series, which is Latin American experimental cinema. It's another case where we invited a curator and editor of a book with the title Ism, Experimental Cinema in Latin America, to do introductions to 3 programs. And it's Jesse Lerner, and he has done these amazing introductions. They're PowerPoint that give you history about the time period in which the works are made and the filmmakers. So those are super valuable. And it's also an interesting model in that the larger series, Ism, was curated by Los Angeles Film Forum. It's one of those big Getty projects. And their contracts run out at the end of the year. So a huge portion of the time they had the series available ended up being online. So they've approached venues all over the country and asked each of them to do different programs. And so together we're all bringing attention to each other's screenings and trying to kind of create a kind of a national community or even beyond of people viewing these works. But with the addition of Jesse's introduction, they're a real treat. And those are in the model that they're up for a short period of time, which is indicated on our website, with lots of the filmmakers talking about their work.
Can you give us a little sneak into some things that you are working on for the next several months?
Kate, do you want to talk about the Women in Technology series?
Yeah, I'm just working on this this series that will be a collaboration with the Women in Tech Initiative at the University of California, and this, I mean, hopefully it'll all come together the way we're envisioning it. But it will be 3 programs that take sort of different looks at women in STEM. So we have a couple of recent documentaries that we're negotiating to host, and then a documentary from a couple of years ago, and they all sort of approach different aspects of women in the fields of science and technology. And then those films will have associated conversations with sort of leaders in the field from the University of California and maybe beyond. So I'm just trying to pull all those parts together. But this is a program where it will be both public facing and campus facing. So the films will be available across several University of California campuses to students and faculty for free. but then they will also be available as ticketed programs for our general audience from anywhere. So it's a really interesting model for being able to work beyond the Berkeley campus to the whole, I mean, as several campuses of Cal. And I was sort of thinking about that, but in a collaboration with another program at another Cal campus that didn't really work out. But I was like, this is a really amazing opportunity, because I mean, Berkeley is already huge, but when you think of all the fabulous brain power and inspired students of the whole of the University of California, and being able to offer something that might appeal across campuses was really exciting. And then it's something that would also appeal to our general public, who could be part of this conversation as well. So I'm really excited to try to make that work in an elegant way.
You know, Gary, this is a really fascinating project, I think, because it came as a suggestion from Jill Finlayson at Citrus. She's here at Berkeley, but she does work across 4 campuses. But it's exactly how to use virtual cinema, to use Kate's curatorial skills and putting together interesting speakers through the context that she's making within this specific field. But I think I'm very excited, because I think it represents the kind of thing that we can do well as a curatorial and educational institution within the COVID period in virtual. So, and it'd be lovely if it was well adopted by viewers, you know, in various cities and broader. So very exciting for us.
I mean, I speculate that the future holds in-person and virtual cinema coexisting and doing very interesting things. Mm-hmm. You know, a couple of years ago, I might not have wanted to say that, because I'm a person who loves to go see the movie in the theater, but I just see that there are tremendous possibilities that can come from this.
Yeah, and if we can, you know, have high caliber presentations with interesting thinkers on cinema and then reach a very broad international community, that's great. And for that to be complementing what we're doing in the theater. Mm-hmm. So I think it'll be, that's something to look forward to. Absolutely.
Yeah, one program that we're working on for late fall is an example of that, where we wouldn't be able to do it in the way we're going to do it in our theater, but online. It can be very exciting, which is Evans Chan, a Hong Kong filmmaker who lives between New York and Hong Kong, has made a couple of documentaries really deeply exploring the protests in Hong Kong, the evolution of the student movement and the Occupy movement, both the umbrella early movement in 2014 and then contemporary. And so he's allowing us to show both of them and then helping organize a panel. And so we'll be able to bring together people from Hong Kong, hopefully from the campus himself. And that's a kind of group of people we couldn't get into our theater. And it's a response to something very, very topical. And so those are kinds of things we can think about, like, you know, as you said, having a hybrid model. It just is beginning to become, you know, we're beginning to understand what things we can do really well online.
Some people say, oh, well, you know, cinema's been around for 120 years and it really hasn't changed a lot. But the reality is that cinema has radically changed constantly if you go through the history of it. The experiments were being done back in the early days and they continue to be done. So this is just part of a progression. Susan, do you have anything you're working on?
Well,
well yeah, I'm sure
this morning, I mean, this is a little bit more in kind of what you would expect, but Frederick Wiseman has a new film, City Hall, that premiered this at the Venice Film Festival in Toronto. And we just heard from the distribution office this morning that we could be launching that in November with its national release. So that would be something that would make a lot of sense for us to do. I mean, longer term, really want to spend more time going back to how we do lecture screening series, and then to think with a virtual overlay of this limitation, but also the possibility of working digitally, where we could work with filmmakers and experts internationally. We've got a little bit of that happening now, but to structure a series where it's going back to more like our approach with the In Focus series, where it's the experience is an in-depth lecture and discussion of a particular set of films, and putting that together in a way that we have to rethink that type of programming in a virtual mindset. But yeah, so what I'm looking at is how we can develop a series of those types of programs. Now, it could be Kate or Kathy or I working on some of those, but it's just, I think, shifting some of our, the balance of the programming to that, to learn how to develop it, package it, and what all we could do that would really be exciting to our public. Yeah.
Yeah, I was honored to be asked to do it one of the Cinema Mon Amour, and I've been thinking maybe that's a return to Cinema Mon Amour on this virtual platform that could happen with writers and filmmakers and musicians from all over the world being able to present that couldn't come in person.
That's interesting. Yeah, yeah.
I really have to wrap up, but I have this question that I really am curious about. A dream film series, or a couple of dream film series that you would love to do that maybe aren't really possible. Maybe some of the films are lost films or in terrible condition, or pulling all the elements together, or sometimes I know a filmmaker's passed away and their estate is refusing to cooperate. But do you have a dream series or two that you might want to tell us about, and maybe it'll come true?
Well, for me, I've done so much work on African cinema, and there's even, our very last show in the theater, which we only got to have because Susan begged the university to let us stay open one extra night, was Suleiman Cissé. And, it was amazing to have him there with his work, right? And he was so touched to have an audience, and they all felt how special it was. Of course, a little bit later, I was like a little worried that we had a full theater, but, the day before the closure, but it all worked out. But so many African filmmakers that we would like to invite and to bring, their works are not, they don't know where their works aren't preserved. And the Martin Scorsese Foundation has begun doing some work, and they're working with Cissé on preserving African cinema. But just to fully have such a better understanding of the history of production from Africa, that would be a really dream series for me I mean, it would be, of course, much bigger than a series, but it brings forward, right, what the need for preservation and the unequal access we have to works from different countries and different cultures, and just how important doing preservation projects are, so that we can have an understanding of very complicated production histories that happened in Africa, whether often co-productions, countries that had, French co-productions or Portuguese co-productions have had stronger, longer histories. But I think that your question saying, dream because they're not access, speaks to so much cinema. We've wanted to do a Glauber Rocha series forever. And, the family is working on preserving his work, but this is a family working on trying to preserve his work in Brazil, where, of course, there are so many complications to a project like that. And so, while I check in with him every year, I really don't know when we're going to get to do that yet another dream series.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up such an important point that most people don't realize, that films are endangered. There are films that are 20 years old that we can't find. I mean, Indie Collect is doing some fantastic work on
yes, they are
stuff out of the Duart Lab that could have just all disappeared, and restoring that work. But I mean, Susan, you're very involved in archival restoration work on an international basis.
It is. And earlier this year, I found out that I received a Warhol Curatorial Fellowship. The topic that I'm working on is Indian art cinema since 1955. And so the way obviously I won't be able to do the travel on this part of the project, but I do look forward to very soon starting to get up to speed on anything I can view related to this topic. But the way I projected that it would unfold would be like a decade-long commitment to showing Indian art cinema and to work with the world's archives, because there's a lot happening now with several archives in India, but also the international effort, partly through the World Cinema Foundation that Martin Scorsese is involved with too. But this would be, you know, for any viewers who have been viewing films at BAMPFA over the decades, they'll remember that, you know, we were showing more South Asian cinema at earlier points, but that whole area of world cinema is so affected by the ravages of climate conditions, of what's happening in the National Archives or in specialized archives, what's happened to the printing elements. So now in the digital era, you know, it's a whole new beginning in the sense that what can be salvaged or what can be worked on. And I wanted to try and kind of, well, we're a small archive when it comes to preservation projects, and we have a very small two-person team in our film collection, but at the same time, our curatorial work is very influential, all of what we do year-round over the years. So I just wanted to try and insert BAMPFA into this kind of the effort, the world effort that's going on around Indian art cinema, and then see what we could bring to the Bay Area over time. And you know, it could be director retrospectives that were bodies of work that can be shown soon, or new cinema. There are a lot of important women filmmakers in India in the last 15, 20 years. So that this project will allow us to do many different things, but to kind of lay down roots in the academic community and the international archival community, but also for our public to have a chance to get to know this area of cinema again. Yeah. So that's coming up.
Kate, you have a dream project?
Yeah, I mean, I've also been the beneficiary of the Warhol Curatorial Fellowship, and I'm sort of in the midst of grappling with the very broad proposal that I gave them, which was to look at cinema since 1960 that used formal innovation and experimentation to address social and political themes. So it's almost an impossibly vast area of research, but it's an opportunity to think about how artists use formal experimentation to address urgent issues of their day. So for me, I'm sort of looking at, well, like the border and what is, you know, there's plenty of radical cinema that maybe is not so formally inventive. So it's also trying to imagine what those borders are and what they mean, to look at some of the scholarship around these areas, and then to come up, I think it will, like Susan's project, it will be several different series over the course of a few years, looking at different aspects of experimentation. So whether it's the use of collage or combining cinema that combines like already existing footage, like collage films, like kind of like how Madeline Anderson worked, which she was kind of one of the inspirations for this series, or maybe directors that use reenactment and the ways in which reenactment is used in different ways to address social and political themes. I was a Townsend Fellow last year, and I got to think a little bit more deeply about one aspect, which was the reenactment as resistance, and how different filmmakers from around the world and from different time periods used reenactment. So I have built a speculative series that I would really love to present. I would also love to align it with some of the brain power at Berkeley to also turn it into a class where maybe we could think more deeply about these films while as we showed it, because every different film in that series really has a different approach to form, has a different political and social context that it's dealing with, and to be able to work with across departments in Berkeley to bring in people to talk about that and think more deeply about the subject would be that's kind of a dream.
those are dreams that I think can come true. Projects, and so that's great, something for us to look forward to. I'd like to wrap up letting you talk a little bit about the website, things that are available to people, and maybe a membership. You know, membership is still available even though the museum's physically closed, and there are benefits beyond just supporting the whole program. I know there's free screenings for members, for example, but there's the cinephiles. The cinephile is something that is a resource that many people don't know exists. It's there, it's free. When is the library accessible now? And when it is physically accessible, what can people come and do in the library? So I just give people a little bit of a sense of some of these other things beyond the screen programming.
Well, the library isn't currently accessible now. It won't be until we can reopen the museum to the public. I mean, first we need to reopen the museum as a workplace, and then at some point down beyond that, open the galleries and the study centers. But thankfully, through many years of very focused work, a lot of our film library collections are digitized. So Cinephiles is the document database. There are over, I think, 130,000 pages that have been scanned. But what's fascinating about Cinephiles, and it just got redesigned and relaunched earlier this year, is that you can do a lot of reading of what has been held in the archives clippings files. So if it's press kits or ephemeral paper objects or rare scripts or notes, and a lot of original reviews of films. I know that the good people at the Criterion Collection love using this website in order to go back and find reviews when historic films came out and how they were originally seen. But you can go very deep in terms of exploring a very wide array of topics in Cinephiles. You know, you could go deep in terms of Bay Area avant-garde materials that have been in the clippings files over years. I think currently we're featuring all of the clippings around Agnes Varda, or some of our distributor collections where we have manuals of Japanese distributors and how films were represented when, you know, back in the day when there were distribution catalogs. So that's Cinephiles. Another wonderful digital resource is the Audio Recordings Archive. We've just finishing up a grant that allowed us to digitize the audio recordings from the Pacific Film Archive Theater from 1971 to 1986. So this is when, you know, magnetic cassette tapes were being put in, and we were recording everything from the booth. And so this is a treasure trove of speakers, everyone from Pauline Kael speaking in 1980 to maybe David Lynch or maybe African filmmakers. But this is a really important part of our Film Library and Study Center's collection that becomes accessible worldwide through all of the digital work that's been done. And then just to also say, as being part of the university, our film collection, which is some 18,000 films and videos, you can search those anywhere in the world by using the OSCICAT interface. So you can bring up quite a bit, if you're a researcher, you can bring up quite a bit of information on the films that we have in our collection, even their condition, and whether or not it would be possible to access those. Or a lot of researchers do their preparatory work and then come and visit Berkeley and use the Film Library and Study Center to access our film collection for really extensive research. But
and the past programming is pretty much all on there as well. So if somebody wants to go and see something about a series you did and read the wonderful program notes, I think most of that is easily accessible. You're mentioning the Pauline Kael thing, for example, and I know that right now on the website, you're featuring through Cinephiles the programs that she did in Berkeley. So if somebody wants to get some history of repertory programming in Berkeley, you can go back and see her programming from the mid-50s to 1960 at the Cinema Studio Guild. Well, it's actually it was Studio Guild only when she was there. And that recording is there. And then I think there's a Warren Sonbart highlight that's on the website as well now. But I urge people to go down that rabbit hole because that's what it is, but it is such a wonderful it's kind of hallucinatory, actually. That's appropriate, I think.
You know, and also I mentioned the TV project that is the library. They have a new portal on the website that is reflecting their research. It's going to keep growing, but reflects their research into TV, top value television. It's got essays and clips, and it's a wonderful entree into that joint project of the library and the film collection.
Great. That's great. Kate, do you have any last things? Anybody have any last things they want to say?
I was just, I mean, thinking about all that's available on our website and you know, with the TV and the audio recordings. I mean, when it was thrilling when they were doing the digitization. One of the highlights of those was when I was presenting a Delphine Seyrig, another actress series that really opened me up to a whole new world of directors, and then the work she had done as a director. But I remember it was Jason in the library was like, oh, we came across an audio recording of Delphine Seyrig when she was here, and bonus, it has Chantal Ackerman, who just showed up for the screening that Delphine Seyrig was doing because she was in town, and Chantal Ackerman responding to an interesting question from our interesting Berkeley audience, which is just like the conversation is just priceless, and that's there. It's just super exciting. So I mean, and there's so much in those audio recordings. You know, people are always asking about what podcast should I listen to, what podcast, but this is kind of like the Wild West. It's like unpackaged podcast. So if you want to be a pioneer and you're listening, I mean, these audio recordings are really the place to go.
This has been very exciting for me. I've known all of you for varying lengths of time, but this is really exciting, and I hope that our viewers have really learned something, and I hope we can do it again sometime. As we see how things are progressing, and certainly when in-person comes back, there are lots of questions to be asked.
Thanks,
so
Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
You know us so well. It was wonderful to talk with you.
Oh, thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.